America, American people, the president and the two parties.
But no apology for the bust-up at the White House, and many of you might think he has nothing to apologise for. The Times' Mark Bennett's covered Zelensky's meetings in Britain. He sent us this voice note about his thoughts on the day.
When asked today before leaving Britain, President Zelensky sidestepped the question of whether he would comply with the White House's demand that he issue an apology over his stormy meeting with President Trump in the Oval Office. He said holding the meeting in front of the press was a mistake, and that it would have been much better if it had been held behind closed doors. He insisted that Ukraine wanted a constructive dialogue with the United States, and that he still believed that Kiev could rely on Washington. But he said it was important that the White House and the Trump administration realized and recognized who the aggressor was in their 3-year-long war. All we want from our partners is a constructive dialogue, and for them to remember who the aggressor is, he said. I would not like it to look as if there are two sides to the war, and it is unclear which of them is the aggressor. It was very important for me that the Ukrainian position was heard. I would not want it to be unclear. I just think that it was important that it was heard in the White House, and not only at the negotiating table, when Putin will be present. We are worthy of equal dialogue, he added.
As Mark Bennett's reflecting on President Zelensky's various meetings and public pronouncements in Britain yesterday. Let's speak to Yevgenia Kravchuk. She's a Ukrainian MP who joins us this morning from Kyiv. Yevgenia, good morning to you.
Good morning.
How are you feeling?
Thank you for having me.
It's a great pleasure. How are you feeling today after all that's happened over the last couple of days?
I will say I'm much better after the coalition of the willing met in London, because I think Europe does need to wake up, and there was a wake-up call in Munich Security Conference. I don't know if you followed that. I was there. I listened to JD Vance, and basically I saw the reaction of the Europeans at first shock, and then we need to do something. Well, this we need to do something cannot stay just in good statements and reassuring that Europe respects values and understands who is the aggressor. So basically, why this coalition is formed not on the form of the EU, it's because Great Britain plays a huge role in security of European continent, but also you might saw the Norwegian Prime Minister. He's not, this country is not in EU, but also Turkey, and the Foreign Minister of Turkey. About what happened in the Oval Cabinet. Well, I honestly think that Zelensky stood up for dignity, and we might be a much smaller nation than Russia or United States, but we cannot be deprived of dignity. We had two revolutions that were about dignity. This war is about dignity and the freedom of choice and the right to be a sovereign nation.
Do you think he failed, though, Zelensky? Because I take the point that many British people watching would agree with you that they thought he was very dignified, but he had one job, and the job was to get through that meeting and get a deal for Ukraine, and he didn't manage to do it. And you can blame Trump and Vance for that, but that was his job. That was his job as a representative of the Ukrainian people, was to get something done with the US, and he didn't manage to do it.
Well, the reason why it happened as it happened, because Ukraine cannot have just something, as some sort of a deal, because we did have a ceasefire in 2015. Remember, it was the Minsk agreement. It was actually formed without United States, so that's why we do strongly believe that United States has to be, in this composition to have a long-lasting peace, because the last time it didn't work out without them. So basically, we do not want the repetition of just a ceasefire, and then Russia will use this break just to build up, to produce more tanks, to mobilize more people, and then come back. And our country will be in weaker position because, we will have to do the demobilization. Obviously, it will be less morale after, unjust deal. And then, Russia will be getting even more Ukrainian territories, will be consuming all the resources because they want the Ukrainian resources as well, human resources, and then with all of this, even bigger army, bigger amount of resources will strike further into other countries.
But the point is, Yevgenia, you need the US, is what you're saying, and at the moment, can't really do a deal with him?
Well, first of all, if you look on the polls, and I still believe that Trump administration is looking on the polls, American people might be, supporting at least the party that voted for Republicans might be supporting this America First, but at the same time they don't want to be allies with Putin, with Russia, and that's the point. Actually, the aid that Ukraine got from United States was voted by bipartisan support in the Congress. It wasn't the sole decision of Biden. So basically, it's already the support of the people. And actually, I was a foreign exchange student in myself in the United States. I lived in Maryland. I still have host family there, and I got a lot of support from American people. Yes, it might be tough point in the personal communication with President Trump, but I believe that it can be, it can be fixed.
You think it can? And he doesn't have to stand down then, because there's an argument that for the greater good of the country, he should step aside because a deal with America is more important than the political future of Zelensky. Do you think he might need to consider that?
We have to understand what is deal with America. If it's just about the minerals, it's now about the investment fund and work together on the resources and the minerals. So it's better than we started off 2 weeks ago. President Zelensky is ready to sign this, but let's answer. Do we have a question? Do we have an answer from the American president? What are concessions from the Russian side? Because right now, the Putin, Lavrov is sticking to the position that they put into the constitution the Ukrainian regions in administrative borders, meaning that Ukrainian army has to step down and actually leave the non-occupied cities. So the regional centers, the Kherson that was liberated in 2022, Zaporizhia that was never under occupation. And we would like, as Ukrainians, of course, to hear what is the position of America on this, how they see it, before talking about any deals as a whole, because I don't see the peace plan for the long-lasting peace right now on the table. It has to be formed yet.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. Yevgenia, good to speak to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
That's Yevgenia Kravchuk. That's an excellent point, Kate, right at the end there, which is we never talk about what Putin is going to concede here, do we? We basically, the position seems to be Ukraine will have to give up something. The US will get a mineral deal. Europe will have to come to Ukraine's aid. But the silent bit is, and Putin will just keep whatever he's got and doesn't have to do anything. Is that you don't often hear what Putin will have to do.
Yeah, I mean, there's often a conversation about territory, and whenever you get into talking to people about what territory will go where, that conversation is always shut down publicly. Those are for Ukraine to set the terms. The UK side often says it's not a conversation we want to have publicly, but it's very clear that Crimea is not going to be handed back to Ukraine. The where the line will be drawn is a sort of much bigger question. And even if we're just talking about territory, what is the incentive here for Russia to seek an end to the war? I mean, you can talk about the economics, you can talk about their military being degraded, but ultimately at the end of the day, they do seem to be getting what they potentially set out for, which is territory, and to break the link between America and the EU and UK.
And in that sense, Putin has kind of won a bit here, because as Zelensky was saying yesterday, there is this blurring of who's the aggressor and who is the victim in all of this. I mean, Zelensky was very clearly treated not as a victim.
Well, not as an equal.
Not as an
I think that's the Zelensky really interesting in his press conference. He said, I walked in there thinking I should be treated as an equal, and I wasn't. And we've got an interview with somebody later in the programme from the Trump side of things who questions whether Ukraine is equal. It should be treated on an equal footing, and I think that is what it comes down to in the end.
Yeah, we're going to try and work out what this all means, because we all had that visceral reaction, as Kate said, to what went on over the weekend. But what happens next? Is Trump winning? Is Putin winning? Is Zelensky losing? Does he even have a future? You'll have maybe thoughts on that. If you've got any questions you want us to try and get to the bottom of, do let us know as well. 0333 003 2353 is the WhatsApp number.
Let's take a quick look at what's happening online and in the papers this morning. On the front page of the Times, a million hospital appointments a year could now be scrapped as cost-cutting threatens the Prime Minister's plan to bring down NHS waiting lists. Patients have been warned about longer waits, and health service bosses are saying there could be a substantial reduction in treatment as a result of the savings plan.
Also in the Times today, businesses are urging the Prime Minister to further water down his workers' rights bill after ministers axed plans for the right to switch off to be enshrined in law. Do you remember that debate we had about that? Was it ever really going to happen? Well, captains of industry are saying the government need to do more to avoid harming the economy as a measure designed to protect employees from always being available out of hours will be dropped from the Employment Rights Bill. A great theme of this next 3 years or 4 years of government is, here are our ideals, here is our quest for growth. Do those two things ever actually meet up in reality?
In brighter news, though, for national prosperity, the BBC reports the UK's death rate has reached an all-time low. Research by the Continuous Mortality Investigation found that deaths per head of the population in 2024 had returned to pre-pandemic levels. The registered death rate in the UK steadily halved from 1974 to 2011, which was largely driven by improvements in tackling heart disease, including smoking prevention and medical advances.
Is that good for national prosperity? Is all living a long time?
Well, it depends if everybody who is living is working and what the age of the population is and where the bulk of the population is in that age scale.
Yeah, I think it's not good for national prosperity, but maybe I'm just a glass half empty person. Should we go to the moon?
Fly me to the moon. Let me.
Million-kilometre journey, which took the billion-dollar craft 46 days to complete.
In the Telegraph, Sainsbury's has started selling alcohol-free beer as part of its sandwich meal deal. Instead of a juice or a smoothie, you can now enjoy a Lucky Saint lager to wash down your ham sarnie and packet of crisps. Stig, this is, okay.
But certainly, the president is going to make good on his word if he doesn't feel that there is sufficient progress. And that's one thing that I learned working for President Trump in the first term, is that there is bite to the bark in terms of the tariff threats, and so countries should take him seriously.
Do you think, could the Trump administration be realising it's not in America's interests to have these tariffs? These surveys that are coming out of the US about the state of the economy, American households not convinced prices won't rise. They expect that prices will now rise faster and faster over the coming year.
Yeah, and you actually see the president tweeting and True Social posting a bit more about this and his view that tariffs won't negatively impact the economy. I think in part because consumer and American views towards tariffs may be softening a bit. But what I'll say is there are two different types of tariffs in Trump's mind. There are tariffs that are designed to address economic issues, unfair trading practices, unbalanced trading relationships, and those types of tariffs are designed to stay in place for the long haul because they are designed to address a long-standing systemic imbalance in trading relationships. And then there are these national security tariffs, like the ones we're seeing for fentanyl and immigration. And those tariffs, by design, are not intended to remain in place for long periods of time. They really are about leverage, really are about trying to get another country to do something. And to that extent, we see a very maximalist view coming out of the White House in terms of the application of these tariffs, 25% across the board, covering everything, no exceptions, no exclusions. But again, that is about pressure. And so from that perspective, I don't think the economic impact of sustained tariffs really comes into the calculus because in an ideal world, they don't even go into effect.
But alongside, though, say, the cuts that we're hearing taking place in the US government departments, worries about where the US economy is going as a whole, would you expect an American recession over the course of the next year?
I don't. And in part because I think that the president's economic plan has yet to be laid out for the American people. And he ran on the border, he ran on inflation, and he ran on trade. But the large piece of his economic plan, which are the tax cuts, the deregulation that we're seeing, energy diversity, and then, of course, tariffs as a part of that to try to rebalance some of these trading relationships, is something that is going to play out over the coming months, if not years. And I think the president's team is optimistic that the entirety of the plan will avoid any sort of recession or long-term negative economic impact.
And just to get your view on events on Friday, we've had the summit here in London in the UK after that meeting between President Zelensky and Trump on Friday and the way that went. Where do you think that needs to go next to get any plan for peace back on track?
Yeah, I watched with great interest. I was both in Washington when Zelensky was meeting with the president, and now I'm in London and saw the prime minister's interview yesterday as well as his speech after that meeting. I think that there's still a pathway here, and I think that President Trump's message, not only to Zelensky but also to Macron and Prime Minister Starmer, who were in Washington the week before, is about working together in a partnership. And I think you've seen Europe step up in terms of not only joining the president in calls for ending this conflict as soon as possible, but also in their own security guarantee for a coalition of the willing. But I definitely think there's a pathway here, and we'll have to see what happens in the next several days.
Kellyanne Shaw, formerly Deputy Assistant to the President for International Economic Affairs, now at the law firm Hogan Lovells. Thank you very much. Emma Moriarty, listening to that investor portfolio manager at CG Asset Management. Emma, good morning to you.
Good morning.
How are investors dealing with the consequences, the diplomatic consequences of the last few days?
Obviously it's been very sort of rocky up and down few days, with a lot of the developments happening after market close on Friday. But in the early morning market reaction so far, it's been positive. So we've seen euro making gains. Similarly, it's some of the Eastern European currencies, Poland and Romania. And also, in Japanese equity markets, we've seen the Nikkei 225. I'm seeing that up about 1.8%, and that's been off the back of sentiment improving and seeing what's happened as a step towards resolving the conflict in Ukraine.
Right. So which parts of the last few days have meant sentiment is improving amongst investors?
Well, I think what's happened is, what's changed is, we had seen sort of piecemeal interactions over the course of a few weeks, and now over this weekend we've started to see a united front across European leaders, and similarly Prime Minister Keir Starmer acting as a bridge between Europe and the United States. And because of this, there's been improved investor sentiment, and we've seen that in early market trading so far, although obviously there's still some way to go.
Yeah, we'll see how that all plays out in Europe in a few hours' time. Cryptocurrencies, Emma, they have jumped in price. Donald Trump revealing the name of 5 of them that he'd like to include in this strategic reserve to try and make the crypto capital of the world the United States. Has there been a particular major step, do you think, or is this just another move in a ever volatile market?
Well, I think it's an interesting one, because obviously this idea of making the US a crypto capital was something that was quite important in his campaign, and it really emboldened the crypto community. And as soon as he came in, there was a presidential working group set up to evaluate this idea, and then it went quiet for a while. And while we still don't know what is exactly the scope of this strategic crypto reserve, whether it's just about confiscated assets or whether it would go so far as the Treasury actually buying crypto assets.
Right.
What it does show is that there is some momentum to this proposal.
Emma, thank you. Good to talk to you. Emma Moriarty from CG Asset Management. Now, the government may be about to dilute its plans to improve workers' rights. The so-called right to switch off would have banned bosses from contacting staff while at home and off the clock. But reports seen in the Sunday Times yesterday that part of the plan is to be dropped to ease the burden on companies who, as we well know, facing hikes in national insurance contributions, minimum wage as well. Neil Carberry is the Chief Executive of the Recruitment and Employment Confederation. Neil, morning to you. Would you mind, would your members mind if this plan of the right to switch off wasn't included?
I think this is a little bit of a phantasm of changes to the bill, Sean. The right to switch off was always a long-term play and very difficult to do. Businesses are more concerned about the stuff that's still in the bill than than stuff that might have been coming 2 or 3 years hence. Things like the new unfair dismissal rules will work. Things like the right to a fixed hours contract for flexible workers. These things we're not yet seeing real progress on, and those are the things that are really affecting those businesses who, as you say, are facing an absolute tirade of rising costs at the moment, with a national insurance increase and a minimum wage that's gone up 25% in 3 years.
So is the government hearing your members, businesses, about the cost increases that are going up? Given we've sort of heard a little bit of a response here, it seems, from the government about things they might be, they think, willing to put in place to make it a little bit easier for businesses.
Yeah, I think there's some really good discussions going on. I think access for business groups and trade unions has been strong. The government is trying to do a lot of the detail of this in the regulations after the bill's passed, the secondary legislation. I think that's important because whatever comes forward has to be negotiated with businesses, with trade unions. It can't just be imposed. A little cheery of some MPs like the Select Committee today calling for everything to be on the face of the bill, because if we did that we'd be rushing it, and there's some real potential for negative effects here, especially loopholes where compliant businesses comply with the law, take the costs, non-compliant businesses don't, and they end up with a cost advantage.
Very briefly, Neil, how's April shaping up to look for British business at the moment?
I think firms are really cagey about the impact of the national insurance rise, but I have to say in the last few weeks, just talking to our members around the country, maybe a few little signs of spring coming in the jobs market.
Neil, thank you. Brief as well. Always appreciated. Chief Executive of the Recruitment and Employment Confederation. I'll be back after 7 o'clock having a look at how defence spending in the UK might be impacted by some of those announcements from Sir Keir Starmer in particular in recent days.
Sean, thanks so much. It's 6:30. Dean Wilson is here with the sports news. Morning, Dean.
Good morning. Yes, thank you, Layla. It's the magic of the FA Cup remained alive and well for Fulham against Manchester United, thanks to goalkeeper Bernd Leno.
Xerxes did score in the third round shootout at the Emirates. Must now do so again. And it's saved by Leno.
Talks after his public falling out with President Trump. Ukraine's leader spoke to journalists after attending a summit with European leaders in London. Israel has faced sharp criticism after it stopped the entry of all food and other supplies into Gaza. Mediators Egypt and Qatar have accused the country of violating humanitarian law. The public inquiry into the COVID pandemic is set to look at the procurement of PPE. It'll start 4 weeks of hearings later, looking at the acquisition and distribution of masks, vaccines and other medical supplies. LBC weather, sunny in southern England and Wales and in Scotland, cloudy with patchy rain elsewhere, a high of 11 degrees.
LBC, Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
Coming up this morning with Nick, the Prime Minister announces £1.6 billion missile deal for Ukraine. Luke Pollard, the Defence Minister, will join Nick live. Should Keir Starmer cancel President Trump's second state visit as the SNP won? Following his explosive row with President Zelensky, Starmer's already said, no, I won't. Nick will have the latest. And Nigel Farage, leader of Reform UK and MP for Clacton, will join Nick to take your calls. All of that and more coming up with Nick Ferrari at breakfast this morning from 7 here on LBC.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. LBC.
I literally would wake up one eye open and then need the cigarette. I was